What if the objects we see streaking through our solar system aren't just cosmic debris? What if some of them are watching, waiting, and following a pattern we're only beginning to understand? Tonight's story takes us into the world of deep space surveillance, government cover-ups, and the terrifying possibility that we're not alone, and haven't been for decades. If you enjoy stories like this that blur the line between science and the unknown, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Sleep Theories for more content that will keep you questioning what's really out there. And drop a comment below letting me know what time you're listening and where you're from around the world. I love connecting with fellow night owls and mystery seekers. Now, let's dive into the Atlas pattern. The coffee had gone cold hours ago, but I kept sipping it anyway. Room temperature caffeine was better than no caffeine, especially when you're staring at endless streams of astronomical data at 3:47 AM. My name is Marcus Webb, and I'm what you might charitably call a data analyst for the Near-Earth Object Surveillance Network, though glorified pattern-matching drone would be more accurate. Most nights were the same routine: cross-reference orbital trajectories, flag anything that deviated from predicted paths, file reports that maybe 3 people would ever read, asteroids, comets, space junk. It all blurred together into points of light moving predictably through the void. The work was mind-numbing, but it paid the bills and kept me close to the stars I'd loved since childhood. That night was different, though I didn't realise it at first. I was reviewing data from 3I Atlas, the interstellar comet that had been making headlines for the past few months. Unlike most comets that originate from our own solar system, this one had come from deep space, only the 3rd confirmed interstellar visitor we'd ever detected. The media loved stories about cosmic wanderers, and 3I Atlas fit the bill perfectly. Except something was wrong with the data. At first I thought it was an equipment malfunction. Comets develop distinctive comas, those glowing halos of gas and dust, when they get close to the sun. It's basic astronomy. But according to my instruments, 3I Atlas showed no signs of outgassing despite being well within the zone, where it should have been blazing like a celestial torch. I pulled up the trajectory data and felt my stomach drop. The orbital path showed tiny corrections, minute adjustments that were impossibly precise for a chunk of ice and rock tumbling through space. I ran the calculations 3 times, then a 4th, but the result was always the same. 3I Atlas wasn't following a natural ballistic trajectory, it was steering. My hands trembled as I documented everything: spectral analysis, trajectory corrections, the complete absence of a coma. I cross-referenced the data with our deep space tracking stations and found the same anomalies reflected across multiple observation points. This wasn't instrument error, this was real. I drafted my report with meticulous care, attaching every piece of supporting data I could find. The implications were staggering. If 3I Atlas was under intelligent control, it meant we were being visited by something far more sophisticated than a wandering comet. I encrypted the files and submitted them through official channels, then sat back in my chair and tried to process what I'd discovered. Sleep was impossible. I spent the remaining hours before dawn triple-checking my work, running additional simulations, and preparing for the inevitable barrage of questions that would come once my superiors saw the report. Part of me was terrified, but another part was electric with excitement. This could be the discovery that changed everything. When I arrived at work the next morning, I went straight to my computer to pull up the backup files of my observation log. The screen flickered to life, and my blood ran cold. The entire night's work was gone. In place of my carefully documented anomalies was a single line of text: instrument error, data invalid, log purged. I tried accessing the backup servers, but every copy had been scrubbed clean. It was as if the past 12 hours of work had never happened. My report had vanished without a trace, leaving no evidence that I'd ever observed anything unusual about 3I Atlas. But I remembered every detail: the trajectory corrections, the missing coma, the impossible precision of its path through space. Someone had wiped my data, but they couldn't wipe my memory. I sat in my cubicle, staring at the blank screen, and realised I was no longer just a data analyst. I had become a witness to something that someone very powerful didn't want the world to know. The question was, what was I going to do about it? The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting their sterile glow across rows of identical workstations. My colleagues went about their morning routines, oblivious to the fact that evidence of possible extraterrestrial intelligence had been discovered and then systematically erased overnight. I wanted to scream, to shake them all and tell them what I'd seen. Instead, I opened a new observation log and tried to pretend that nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I just didn't know how much yet. I spent the morning trying to reconstruct my observations from memory, but without the raw data, it felt like chasing shadows. Every time I pulled up 3i Atlas in the current tracking system, the trajectory looked perfectly normal. Textbook comet behaviour with no signs of the anomalies I'd documented just hours before. Around lunch, I decided to reach out to Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a colleague at the Palomar Observatory who'd been tracking the same object. If anyone else had noticed the irregularities, it would be her. I kept the email casual, asking about her observations and mentioning that I'd seen some interesting data patterns the night before. Her reply came back within minutes. "Hey Marcus, nothing unusual on our end. Standard comet behaviour all the way. Maybe check your instrument calibration." The dismissal stung, but I couldn't blame her. Without the data to back up my claims, I sounded like another conspiracy theorist seeing patterns in random noise. I spent the afternoon reviewing archived observations, looking for any trace of what I'd seen, but came up empty. When I got home that evening, I went straight to my home office to fire up my personal workstation. If the official channels had been compromised, maybe I could find some trace of the truth in my own files. I'd been in the habit of backing up interesting observations to my personal cloud storage, just in case. The computer took longer than usual to boot up. When the desktop finally appeared, I noticed immediately that something was wrong. Files were missing, folders had been rearranged, my backup directories were completely empty. A chill ran down my spine as I checked the access logs. According to the timestamps, my computer had been remotely accessed while I was at work. Someone had systematically gone through my personal files and deleted anything related to astronomical observations from the past month. I was reaching for my phone to call tech support when it rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number. "Hello? Marcus Webb?" The voice was calm, professional, with a slight electronic distortion that suggested it was being run through a voice changer. "Who is this?" "Someone who wants to help you avoid making a very serious mistake. You filed a report last night about anomalous observations of Object 3i Atlas. That report has been classified and removed from all systems." My mouth went dry. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Mr. Webb, we know exactly what you saw, and we know you backed up the data. We also know you've already reached out to colleagues trying to verify your observations. This is your only warning. You didn't see what you think you saw. Drop it." "Listen, I don't know who you are, but we know where you live, Marcus. We know about your sister in Portland, your ex-wife in Denver, your elderly parents in Florida. We know about your mortgage, your student loans, your chronic insomnia, and your prescription for Ambien. We know everything about you, and we're asking you nicely to forget about last night." The line went dead. I sat in my darkened office, phone still pressed to my ear, trying to process what had just happened. The specificity of the threats was terrifying. They weren't bluffing. Someone had compiled a complete dossier on my life, and they were willing to use it to keep me quiet. But quiet about what? If 3i Atlas was just a comet, why go to such elaborate lengths to cover up my observations? The very existence of this conspiracy suggested that what I'd seen was real, and more significant than I'd imagined. I walked through my apartment, checking locks and drawing curtains. Every shadow seemed to harbour potential surveillance, every car passing on the street a possible threat. I'd stumbled onto something that powerful people desperately wanted hidden, and now I was in their crosshairs. The smart thing would be to listen to the warning, delete whatever remaining files I could find, and pretend the whole thing never happened. I could go back to my quiet life of routine observations and meaningless reports. I could be safe. But I couldn't get the image out of my head. That metallic glint making impossible course corrections as it sailed through the void. If this was evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence, didn't the world have a right to know? I made a decision that would haunt me for months to come. Instead of backing down, I was going to dig deeper. The next few days passed in a haze of paranoia and careful routine. I went to work, processed data on mundane asteroids, and avoided anything remotely connected to 3i Atlas. My supervisors seemed satisfied that I'd gotten the message, but I could feel their eyes on me whenever I moved through the office. At home, I'd become obsessive about security. I disconnected my personal computer from the internet and started using an old laptop with a VPN connection from various coffee shops around the city. If someone was monitoring my activities, I was going to make it as difficult as possible. It was on Thursday night, exactly a week after my initial observations, that everything changed again. I was reviewing innocuous comet data on the disconnected computer when a notification chimed from the old laptop. New email. That was odd. I hadn't given the address to anyone, and it was supposed to be completely anonymous. The sender field was blank. The subject line read simply, "You're not alone." My cursor hovered over the message for several long minutes. Every instinct screamed that this was a trap, another layer of the conspiracy designed to draw me deeper into danger. But curiosity won out, and I clicked. The email contained no text, just a single encrypted attachment. The file name was project_atlas_1987_declassified.pdf. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. 1987. That was decades before the discovery of our first confirmed interstellar visitor. Yet here was a file suggesting that something called Project Atlas had been operational for over 30 years. The decryption key was embedded in the file metadata, almost as if someone wanted to make sure I could access it easily. I ran the file through every security scanner I could find, but it came back clean. Finally, I opened it. What I saw made my hands shake so badly I nearly dropped the laptop. The document was a partial intelligence briefing stamped with classifications I'd never seen before. The header read, "Interstellar Object Reconnaissance Program, Project Atlas, Eyes Only." The first page contained an executive summary that made my blood run cold. Analysis of Object Designation 1/2017 U1 Oumuamua confirms artificial origin and reconnaissance capabilities consistent with previous visitations dating to 1987. Object demonstrated control trajectory adjustments, non-gravitational acceleration, and structural properties incompatible with natural formation. Recommend continuation of monitoring protocols and information containment procedures. I scrolled through page after page of technical analysis, trajectory data, and spectroscopic readings that painted a picture I could barely comprehend. Oumuamua, the first officially recognised interstellar visitor, hadn't been a natural object at all. According to this document, it was some kind of reconnaissance probe, and it wasn't the first. The file included a timeline that made my stomach churn. 1987, first confirmed artificial interstellar object, designation classified. 1996, second visitor, trajectory adjusted to avoid detection. 2003, third visitor demonstrated active camouflage capabilities. 2017, Oumuamua arrival, too large to conceal from public observation. 2019, 2I/Borisov, partial artificial characteristics detected, and at the bottom of the timeline, a chilling projection. Pattern analysis suggests visitation cycle of 6 to 7 years, with each object following optimized surveillance trajectories through inner solar system. Recommend heightened monitoring for next projected arrival, 2025 to 2026 time frame. 3i Atlas had arrived right on schedule. I spent hours poring over the technical data trying to understand the implications. These weren't random cosmic visitors. They were part of a systematic surveillance operation spanning decades. Someone, or something, had been conducting regular reconnaissance of Earth, and our governments had known about it all along. The document included references to information containment protocols and civilian observation management, which explained what had happened to my data. This wasn't just a cover-up. It was a well-established system for suppressing any evidence that leaked into public channels. But why give me this information? Who had access to such highly classified material? And why were they willing to risk everything to leak it to a low-level data analyst? I printed the entire document on the coffee shop's printer, then deleted all traces from the laptop. This was too important to trust to digital storage alone. As I walked home through the darkened streets, clutching the papers under my jacket, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The next morning brought a fresh horror. When I arrived at work, my supervisor was waiting at my desk with a grim expression. "Marcus, we need to talk. Conference room 3 now." Inside the sterile meeting room, he laid out a series of photographs across the table. They showed me entering the coffee shop, using the laptop, printing documents, and walking home with a manila envelope under my arm. "We've been very patient with you," he said quietly, "but this ends now. Whatever game you think you're playing, it stops today." I stared at the surveillance photos, realizing just how completely I was outmatched. They'd been watching every move, documenting every attempt to investigate further. The leaked document wasn't help. It was bait, designed to draw me out and prove that I couldn't be trusted to stay quiet. "I don't know what you want me to say," I managed. "I want you to say that you understand. You're a good analyst, Marcus, but you're in way over your head. Take a vacation, 2 weeks, paid leave. Think about whether this job is really the right fit for you." The message was clear. Back off or lose everything. But as I cleaned out my desk under the watchful eyes of security, I couldn't help but smile grimly. They thought they'd caught everything, but they were wrong. Hidden in my apartment was a complete copy of the Project Atlas file, and more importantly, I now knew I wasn't the only one who'd seen through the deception. Someone else was out there, someone with access to the deeper secrets of the conspiracy, and they were trying to help me expose the truth. 2 weeks of forced vacation gave me time to think, but sleep remained elusive. Every night I found myself staring out my bedroom window at the stars, wondering how many of those points of light had been visited by the Watchers. The Project Atlas document had opened a door to a reality I couldn't close again. I'd hidden the printed files in a safety deposit box at a bank across town, but I'd memorized every crucial detail. The pattern was what haunted me most. Regular intervals, a systematic coverage, and a level of coordination that suggested long-term planning spanning multiple decades. During the day, I visited libraries and used their public computers to dig through archived astronomical data. I was looking for gaps, objects that had been observed briefly and then forgotten, trajectory anomalies that had been dismissed as instrument error, anything that might fit the pattern described in the classified document. What I found was more disturbing than I'd imagined. In 1987, the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics had published a brief note about an unusual object designated 1987 QX. The initial observations showed it on an interstellar trajectory, but follow-up attempts failed to relocate it. The official explanation was insufficient data for continued tracking. But buried in the technical appendix, I found a reference to anomalous spectral characteristics suggesting metallic composition and non-gravitational acceleration inconsistent with comet outgassing. 1987, QX had been the first visitor, exactly as described in the leaked document. I found similar patterns throughout the historical record, objects that appeared briefly in official catalogues before being reclassified or forgotten entirely, always at the predicted intervals, always showing subtle signs of artificial origin, always disappearing from public view after initial detection. The 1996 visitor had been detected by 3 different observatories, but within months, all references to it had been removed from published papers. I found fragments in old conference abstracts and preliminary reports, but the object itself had been erased from the official record. By 2003, the concealment efforts had become more sophisticated. That year's visitor never appeared in any public catalogues at all, but I found oblique references to it in budget documents, requesting additional funding for deep space monitoring equipment, and personnel evaluations praising staff for exceptional discretion in sensitive operations. The pattern was undeniable. For over 30 years, someone had been systematically monitoring and covering up evidence of artificial objects entering our solar system. The only question was, who was doing the covering up, and what were they hiding? My research was interrupted by a phone call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Is this Marcus Webb?" The voice was elderly, gravelly, with a slight tremor. "Who's asking?" "Someone who's been watching your library research with great interest. My name is Dr. Harold Peterson. I think we should meet." The name was familiar. I'd seen it referenced in some of the older papers I'd been reviewing. Harold Peterson had been a respected astronomer in the 1980s, specialising in small body observations. His publications had stopped abruptly in 1988. "What do you want?" "I want to show you something that will change how you see everything, but not over the phone. Are you familiar with the old Griffith Observatory parking lot? Meet me there at midnight." Every instinct told me it was a trap, but I'd come too far to turn back now. That night I drove through the winding roads of Griffith Park, checking my rearview mirror constantly for signs of surveillance. The observatory was closed, its parking lot nearly empty except for a few late-night stargazers. Dr. Peterson was exactly what I'd expected. A thin, white-haired man in his 70s, leaning heavily on a walking cane and clutching a worn leather satchel. But his eyes were sharp and alert, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of terrible knowledge. "You're not the first to notice the pattern, Mr. Webb. I've been tracking it for over 3 decades. The difference is, I learned to keep my mouth shut." We sat on a bench overlooking the Los Angeles basin, the city lights washing out all but the brightest stars. He opened the satchel and withdrew a collection of photographs, charts, and handwritten notes. 1987 was when it all started for me, he said. I was working at Palomar then, part of a team doing systematic surveys of near-Earth objects. We detected 1987 QX on a Tuesday night in October. By Friday our department had been restructured, and I'd been reassigned to different projects. He showed me photographs of the object, grainy black and white images that nonetheless clearly showed an elongated structure with sharp edges and reflective surfaces. Nothing like any natural comet I'd ever seen. They offered me a choice: sign a non-disclosure agreement and continue my career studying harmless asteroids, or maintain my academic integrity and find myself blacklisted from every observatory in the world. I chose my career and I've regretted it every day since. Why are you telling me this now? Because I'm 74 years old, mister. Webb, I have pancreatic cancer, and I'm going to be dead within 6 months. They can't threaten my career anymore, and I'm tired of carrying this secret. He handed me a manila folder filled with documentation I'd never seen before. Internal memos about visitor protocols, budget allocations for special projects, and correspondence between observatories about maintaining operational security. There are more of us out there, he said. Astronomers who've seen things they can't talk about, technicians who've been reassigned after asking too many questions, graduate students whose thesis projects have been mysteriously cancelled. We're scattered, isolated and afraid, but we're not alone. The final document in the folder was a list of names and contact information. 24 astronomers, all with similar stories of suppressed observations and forced silence. At the top of the list was a note in Doctor. Peterson's handwriting. Project Atlas isn't just about covering up alien visitation. It's about preparing for something much bigger. The pattern is accelerating. What do you mean, accelerating? The intervals between visits are getting shorter. The objects are getting larger, and according to my calculations, the next one isn't coming to observe anymore. He pointed up at the stars with a trembling finger. It's coming to stay. We sat in silence for several long minutes, the weight of his words settling over me like a shroud. Finally, I asked the question that had been haunting me since I'd first seen the anomalous data. What do we do about it? Dr. Peterson smiled grimly. We prepare for the possibility that our governments have been lying to us for 37 years, and we get ready to find out what they've really been hiding. As I drove home that night, the list of names burning like a coal in my jacket pocket, I realised that my journey was far from over. I thought I was investigating a simple cover-up, but I was actually uncovering something much more complex and terrifying. The watchers in space weren't just visitors passing through our solar system. They were scouts, preparing the way for something bigger. And soon, we were going to find out what that something was. Dr. Peterson's death made the obituary section of the Los Angeles Times 3 days after our meeting. Noted astronomer Harold Peterson, 74, died, peacefully in his sleep after a brief illness. No mention of his decades of research or his role in early deep space observations. Just another forgotten scientist disappearing from the record. But his list lived on. I'd spent the past week carefully reaching out to the contacts he'd provided, using coded language and anonymous email accounts. The responses had been both encouraging and terrifying. Dr. Elena Rodriguez from the University of Arizona. I've been waiting 30 years for someone to ask the right questions. James Mitchell, formerly of JPL. They reassigned me to Mars imaging after I got too curious about irregular trajectories. I've kept my own records. Professor Liu Wei from Beijing Observatory. The phenomenon is global. Chinese space program has similar protocols. Each conversation revealed another piece of the puzzle. The conspiracy wasn't limited to American institutions. It was an international effort involving every major spacefaring nation. The implications were staggering. My unofficial network was coming together just in time for the Southwest Astronomical Conference in Phoenix. It was perfect cover. Hundreds of professional and amateur astronomers gathering to discuss recent observations and share data. If I was careful, I could meet with several of my contacts without raising suspicion. I registered under my real name and booked a flight to Phoenix, trying to maintain the appearance of normal professional activity. But as I packed for the trip, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Cars seemed to linger too long outside my apartment. The same face appeared in multiple coffee shops. Paranoia, maybe, but the events of the past month had taught me to trust my instincts. The conference was held at a sprawling resort complex in Scottsdale, with sessions scattered across multiple buildings and hundreds of attendees milling about between presentations. Perfect for discreet meetings, but also perfect for surveillance. I'd arranged to meet Dr. Rodriguez during the lunch break at a quiet cafe in the resort's north wing. She was a compact woman in her 50s, with prematurely grey hair and intense dark eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail of her surroundings. "You're taking a big risk reaching out to all of us," she said quietly as we found a corner table. "They're very good at monitoring communications." "I know," but Dr. Peterson thought it was time to break the silence. "Harold was a good man. He carried this burden longer than any of us should have to." She slid a thin tablet across the table. "I've compiled everything I could recover from my observations in 1996. The trajectory data alone should be enough to prove artificial control." I downloaded the files to an encrypted drive, noting the precision of her documentation. This wasn't the work of a conspiracy theorist. This was rigorous scientific analysis that had been systematically suppressed. "There's something else," she said. "I've been in contact with colleagues in other countries. The pattern isn't random. These objects are conducting systematic reconnaissance of our entire solar system, mapping resources, defensive capabilities, population centres. For what purpose? That's what we need to find out. But I don't think we have much time left." Our meeting was interrupted by the arrival of James Mitchell, a nervous-looking man in his 60s who kept glancing over his shoulder as he approached our table. "We need to move," he said urgently. "There's a man with a camera taking pictures of everyone at this table." Black suit, earpiece, sitting by the fountain. I turned casually and spotted him immediately. Too well dressed for a conference, too alert for a tourist. Our eyes met for a split second before he looked away, but I'd seen enough to know we were blown. "How did they find us so fast?" Dr. Rodriguez whispered. "Doesn't matter," Mitchell replied. "What matters is getting out of here before they decide we're too dangerous to monitor passively." We separated and left through different exits, but the damage was done. My cover was blown, and now they knew I was actively building a network of suppressed witnesses. As I walked back to my hotel room, I could feel eyes on me from multiple directions. That evening I attended a presentation on deep space observation techniques, trying to maintain the appearance of normal conference activity. But my mind was racing, processing everything I'd learned and trying to anticipate their next move. The answer came sooner than expected. When I returned to my room at 11 p.m, the door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open slowly, reaching for the light switch, and froze. My room had been systematically searched. Every piece of luggage had been opened, every pocket turned inside out. My laptop was missing, along with the encrypted drives containing the leaked documents. But they'd left something behind, a single photograph on the bed. It showed me sitting at the cafe with Doctor, Rodriguez and Mitchell, all three of us clearly identifiable, written across the bottom in red ink, "Last warning." I grabbed my passport and the few items they'd left behind and got out of there immediately. The hotel lobby was filled with conference attendees, but I could spot at least 3 people who didn't belong, too alert, too focused on me specifically. I made it to my rental car and drove straight to the airport, abandoning my scheduled return flight for the first available departure to anywhere. As the plane lifted off, I watched Phoenix's lights disappear below and tried to process how completely my life had changed. I was no longer an investigator uncovering a conspiracy. I was a fugitive being actively pursued by forces with unlimited resources and no apparent limits on their willingness to use them. But I'd also gained something invaluable, proof that I wasn't alone and confirmation that the pattern was real. Whatever was coming, there were others who'd been preparing for it, and together we might stand a chance of exposing the truth. The question now was whether we could do it before they silenced us all permanently. I spent 3 weeks moving between cheap motels and internet cafes, using cash and fake names, trying to stay one step ahead of whoever was hunting me. The paranoia was exhausting, but the leaked documents I'd memorized kept me focused on the bigger picture. If the pattern was real, if something was coming, then the world deserved to know. My breakthrough came through an unexpected connection. Professor Liu Wei had put me in touch with a contact in the hacktivist community, someone known only as Ghost Signal, who specialized in hijacking broadcast streams for political messages. If I could provide credible evidence, they could get it in front of millions of people before anyone could stop them. The meeting was set up through an elaborate chain of encrypted communications. I found myself in a 24-hour diner in Albuquerque, sitting across from a 20-something woman with purple hair and enough facial piercings to set off a metal detector. She introduced herself only as Maya, and seemed to take the whole thing as a personal challenge. "So you're telling me the government's been covering up alien visitors for 30 years, she said, stirring sugar into her coffee. "Not alien visitors, reconnaissance probes. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Either way, it's the biggest story in human history and they've been lying about it." She pulled out a modified tablet and began typing rapidly. "I can get you into any broadcast stream you want. Major networks, streaming services, social media feeds. The question is, what exactly do you want to tell people?" I'd been preparing for this moment for weeks. The message needed to be clear, credible, and impossible to dismiss as a hoax. I outlined my plan, a 10-minute presentation laying out the evidence, supported by the data I'd compiled from multiple sources. "Here's the problem," Maya said. "As soon as you start broadcasting, they're going to try to shut you down. I can keep the stream live for maybe 15 minutes before they find all my back doors. You get one shot at this. That's all I need." We spent the next hour setting up the technical details. Maya would hijack a popular astronomy livestream during peak viewing hours, giving me access to an audience already interested in space-related content. The broadcast would go out simultaneously across multiple platforms, making it harder to suppress completely. "One more thing," she said as we prepared to leave. "Once this goes live, there's no going back. They'll know exactly who you are and where you are. You sure you're ready for that?" I thought about Dr. Peterson dying alone with his secrets, about Dr. Rodriguez and the others spending decades in forced silence, about 3i Atlas sailing through space on its impossible trajectory while the world remained oblivious to the truth. I'm ready. The broadcast was scheduled for 9 p.m. Eastern Time on a Thursday night, prime viewing for astronomy enthusiasts. I'd rented a small studio space under a fake name and set up basic recording equipment. Maya would handle the technical aspects remotely, leaving me to focus on delivering the most important message of my life. At exactly 9 o'clock, Maya's voice crackled through my earpiece. "You're live in 3, 2, 1. Good evening. My name is Marcus Webb, and I'm a data analyst for the Near-Earth Object Surveillance Network. What I'm about to tell you will challenge everything you think you know about our place in the universe. I started with 3-Eye Atlas, describing my initial observations and the systematic erasure of evidence. Then I expanded to the broader pattern, using charts and graphs to illustrate the regular intervals and artificial characteristics of the interstellar visitors. These objects aren't random cosmic debris, I continued, holding up copies of the leaked documents. They're part of a systematic reconnaissance program that has been monitoring Earth for over 3 decades. Our governments know this, and they've been actively covering it up. The chat feed exploded with comments, skepticism mixed with fascination as viewers tried to process what they were hearing. Some demanded additional proof, others shared their own unexplained observations, and a few confirmed that similar anomalies had been reported in other countries. The pattern is accelerating, I said, moving to my final slides. The intervals between visits are getting shorter, and according to my analysis, the next object, designated 4I/ATLAS, isn't coming to observe. It's coming to establish a permanent presence. I displayed the trajectory calculations that showed the next visitor would arrive within 18 months, on a path that would bring it into a stable orbit around Earth rather than passing through the solar system. Based on the data I've compiled from multiple sources, 4I/ATLAS will arrive in approximately 543 days. Unlike its predecessors, this object will not be leaving. It will take up position in our local space, and we need to be prepared for what that means. The chat feed was going crazy now, with thousands of viewers sharing the stream and demanding answers. Several amateur astronomers confirmed they could verify parts of my data with their own observations. The message was spreading faster than I dared hope. That's when Maya's voice crackled urgently in my earpiece. "We've got company." Black SUVs surrounding the building, and my feeds are being traced. "Wrap it up now." "If you're watching this, please share it with everyone you know," I said quickly. "The truth has been hidden for too long. In less than 2 years, we're going to find out what 37 years of reconnaissance has been preparing for. Don't let them keep you in the dark anymore." The feed went black just as I heard heavy footsteps in the corridor outside. I grabbed my notes and headed for the fire exit, but it was too late. 3 men in dark suits were already coming through the door, moving with the efficiency of people who'd done this many times before. "Mr. Webb, you need to come with us." I thought about running, but there was nowhere to go. I'd accomplished what I'd set out to do. The message was out there, spreading across the internet faster than they could contain it. Even if they silenced me now, the truth was already in motion. "Did I get your attention?" I asked. The lead agent smiled coldly. "You have no idea what you've just done." As they led me out in handcuffs, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a storefront window. I looked exhausted, paranoid, probably more than a little crazy. But I also looked free. For the first time in months, I wasn't carrying the burden of the secret alone. The truth was finally out there, and now the world would have to decide what to do with it. I spent the next 72 hours in a windowless room that officially didn't exist, being questioned by people who officially weren't there. They didn't identify themselves, didn't read me my rights, and didn't seem particularly interested in following any legal procedures I was familiar with. The questions were always the same. Who had given me the classified documents? How many copies existed? Who else was involved in my conspiracy to disseminate false information? I stuck to the same answers. I'd acted alone, based on my own observations and publicly available data. They showed me printouts of the social media explosion that had followed my broadcast. Number sign Atlas pattern was trending worldwide, with millions of shares and thousands of amateur astronomers attempting to verify my claims. The initial wave of skepticism was giving way to grudging acceptance, as independent observers confirmed the trajectory anomalies I'd described. "You've caused quite a stir," said the lead interrogator, a woman in her 40s with steel-grey hair and eyes like winter. 12 countries have filed formal diplomatic protests. 3 observatories have been forced to release previously classified data. The president is demanding answers. "Good," I said. "Maybe now we can have an honest conversation about what's really happening." "You have no idea what you've done. Do you think we've been keeping this secret for fun? Do you think there isn't a reason for the careful management of this information?" For the first time I detected something other than cold professionalism in her voice. There was fear there, carefully controlled but unmistakable. "Then tell me the reason," I said. She was quiet for a long moment, studying my face as if trying to decide something important. Finally she spoke. "The reason is panic, mister." Webb. "The reason is the complete collapse of social order when 6 billion people realise they're not alone in the universe and that their governments have been lying to them for decades. The reason is mass hysteria, economic collapse and the end of civilization as we know it. People have a right to know. People have a right to survive. And sometimes those two rights are incompatible." She pulled out a tablet and showed me a series of news reports from the past few days. Stock markets crashing as investors fled anything connected to space technology. Religious leaders declaring the end times. Protest movements demanding government transparency. Military bases around the world placed on high alert. "This is just the beginning," she said. "Your little broadcast has started something that none of us can control anymore. I hope you're proud of yourself." They released me that evening without explanation, dropping me off at a bus station in a city I didn't recognise with nothing but my wallet and a warning to maintain a low profile. As I waited for a bus back to Los Angeles, I checked my phone for the first time in 3 days. The internet had exploded. My broadcast had been downloaded millions of times before the original streams were taken down. Amateur astronomers around the world were confirming the trajectory anomalies. Government officials were being pressed for statements, offering carefully worded non-denials that only fueled more speculation. But there was also a disturbing counter-narrative emerging. Professional debunkers were dissecting my presentation, pointing out inconsistencies and questioning my credentials. News outlets were running pieces about dangerous conspiracy theories and the psychology of false pattern recognition. My personal life was being scrutinised, with emphasis on my history of insomnia and anxiety medication. By the time I made it back to Los Angeles, the story was already shifting. The initial excitement was fading, replaced by sophisticated disinformation campaigns that made my claims seem increasingly implausible. Fake documents were circulating that contradicted my evidence. Expert witnesses were appearing on news programs to explain how natural phenomena could account for the observed anomalies. The cover-up was adapting, evolving to contain the damage I'd caused. I found my apartment exactly as I'd left it, but something felt different. The locks hadn't been changed. Nothing appeared to be missing, but there was a subtle wrongness that I couldn't quite identify. It wasn't until I checked my computer that I understood. Every file related to my investigation was gone, replaced by different versions that told a completely different story. The trajectory data now showed normal comet behaviour. The leaked documents appeared to be obvious forgeries. My own research notes had been altered to make me look delusional. They weren't just discrediting my story, they were gaslighting me on a personal level, making me question my own memories and observations. But they'd made one mistake. Hidden in a safety deposit box across town were the original printed documents Dr. Peterson had given me, physical proof that couldn't be digitally altered. As long as those papers existed, I had evidence that the conspiracy was real. I spent my first night back trying to contact the other members of my informal network, but most of their numbers had been disconnected. Dr. Rodriguez's university claimed she'd taken an extended sabbatical. James Mitchell's former colleagues insisted he'd moved overseas without leaving a forwarding address. Only Maya responded to my encrypted messages, and her news wasn't encouraging. "They've been thorough," she typed. "Every copy of the broadcast has been scrubbed from major platforms. The mirrors I set up have been taken down. Even the cached versions are disappearing from search engines. What about the amateur confirmations? Being systematically debunked. They've got teams of experts explaining away every anomaly, providing alternative interpretations for every piece of evidence. It's like watching history being rewritten in real time." I stared at my screen, feeling the weight of defeat settling over me. I'd sacrificed everything to get the truth out, and they were erasing it as efficiently as they'd erased my original data files. "There's something else," Maya continued. "I've been monitoring the official astronomy networks. They're planning something big. A coordinated announcement about 3i Atlas that's going to put this whole thing to bed once and for all." The announcement came 2 days later, during a press conference at NASA headquarters. A panel of distinguished astronomers and agency officials presented their definitive analysis. of 3-Eye Atlas, complete with detailed explanations for every anomaly I'd observed. The trajectory corrections were caused by asymmetric outgassing from previously undetected volatile compounds. The lack of a visible coma was due to unusual mineral composition that sublimated in the infrared spectrum. The precise course changes were actually random fluctuations that appeared purposeful when viewed through the lens of conspiracy thinking. They even had a new name for the phenomenon: false pattern syndrome, a psychological condition where observers perceived intentional design in random data. I was cited as a textbook example, a well-meaning analyst whose mental health issues had led him to see aliens where none existed. The presentation was flawless, authoritative, and completely convincing. Within hours, the remaining support for my claims evaporated. Social media moved on to other conspiracies. The news cycle found new crises to exploit. 3-Eye Atlas was officially just another comet, and I was officially just another delusional conspiracy theorist. But as I watched the press conference from my apartment, clutching Dr. Peterson's documents and remembering the fear in my interrogator's eyes, I knew they hadn't really won. They'd controlled the narrative, managed the public reaction, and preserved the status quo. But they couldn't change the truth. In less than 500 days, 4I/ATLAS would arrive, and all their careful lies would be exposed. The only question was whether anyone would be watching when it happened. Picture this. You're working security at one of Miami's busiest shopping centres on New Year's Eve, expecting nothing more than the usual drunk tourists and teenage troublemakers. But then you witness something that changes everything. Something the authorities desperately want erased from existence. Tonight's story comes from a special video suggestion by CJB64648, and it's a deep dive into one of the most covered-up incidents in recent memory. If you enjoy these mysterious tales that keep you awake at night, make sure to like and subscribe to Sleep Theories and drop your own story suggestions in the comments below. You never know, your idea might be our next investigation. My name is Marcus Rivera, and I used to be somebody who slept peacefully at night. That was before January 1st, 2020, before I became the kind of person who checks over their shoulder in grocery store parking lots and keeps burner phones in different states. Before I learned that some truths are too dangerous to speak aloud. I'd been working security at Bayside Marketplace for 3 years when it happened. It wasn't glamorous work, mostly dealing with shoplifters pocketing designer knockoffs, breaking up fights between drunk college kids, and occasionally escorting belligerent tourists off the property. The pay was decent, the hours were steady, and in a city like Miami, steady work was a blessing I didn't take for granted. New Year's Eve was always busy. The marketplace transformed into a pulsing carnival of music, fireworks, and celebration. Street performers juggled fire while salsa dancers spun beneath strings of lights that turned the whole complex into something magical. I'd worked enough of these nights to know the rhythm, start quiet, build to chaos around midnight, then gradually wind down as people stumbled home or migrated to after-parties in South Beach. That night started exactly like all the others. I was stationed in the main security office, a cramped room lined with monitors showing feeds from 37 cameras throughout the complex. My partner, Julie Santos, was doing walking rounds while I kept watch on the screens. The usual suspects were out in force, teenagers trying to sneak alcohol, couples looking for dark corners to make out, and the occasional pickpocket working the crowd. At 11:47 p.m, my radio crackled to life. "Marcus, we've got a situation in the food court," Julie's voice came through tense and breathless. "Big fight. Multiple juveniles involved. I'm calling it in." I leaned forward in my chair, switching the main monitor to the food court cameras. Sure enough, I could see a cluster of people in the centre of the dining area, with several figures on the ground and others throwing punches. It looked like a typical teenage brawl that had gotten out of hand, the kind of thing that happened when too many high school crews ended up in the same space, with too much alcohol and testosterone. "Copy that," I radioed back, already pulling up the incident report form on my computer. "I've got eyes on it. Looks like 6, maybe 7 individuals involved." Within minutes, the place was swarming with Miami-Dade police. I watched through the cameras as officers flooded the food court, separating fighters and zip-tying hands behind backs. Standard procedure for this kind of thing. I'd seen it dozens of times before. But then Lieutenant Rodriguez's voice came over the radio with an order I'd never heard in 3 years of working security. "Rivera, I need you to stay in that office and monitor all camera feeds. Do not leave that room. We're looking for additional suspects who may have fled the scene." Additional suspects? I frowned at the monitors. From what I could see, they'd already detained everyone involved in the fight. But orders were orders, and I started systematically scanning through all 37 camera angles, looking for anyone running or acting suspicious. That's when I saw it. Or rather, that's when I saw him. Camera 23 covered the north parking lot, the area closest to the marina where most of the high-end tourists parked their rental cars. It was usually one of the quieter feeds. Not much foot traffic, just people coming and going from the restaurants along the water. But at 11:52 p.m, something moved across the screen that made me sit up straighter in my chair. A figure was walking through the parking lot, weaving between the police cars that had responded to the food court incident. At first glance, it looked like a person, tall, thin, wearing what appeared to be dark clothing. But something about the movement was wrong. It was too fluid, too purposeful. While everyone else in the area was either running toward the excitement or hurrying away from it, this figure moved with an almost predatory stillness. I leaned closer to the monitor and reached for the camera controls, zooming in for a better look. The figure was definitely tall, maybe 6.5 feet, possibly taller. The proportions seemed off somehow, like the limbs were too long for the torso, but the resolution wasn't good enough to be certain. As I adjusted the focus, trying to get a clearer image, the figure suddenly stopped walking and turned directly toward the camera. That's when I got my first real look at the face, or what should have been a face. The zoom wasn't perfect, but even through the pixelated digital enhancement, I could see that something was fundamentally wrong with this person's features. The head seemed too elongated, tilted at an angle that would have been uncomfortable for a human being, and the eyes reflected the parking lot lights like an animal's, throwing back twin points of cold white light. I blinked hard and refocused the camera, but when the image cleared again, the figure was gone. Not walking away, not running, simply gone, as if it had never been there at all. "What the hell?" I muttered, rewinding the feed to watch it again. But when I tried to replay the footage, the screen glitched. Digital static filled camera 23's feed, then cleared to show the parking lot as it should be. Empty police cars, no mysterious figure, nothing but concrete and streetlights. I switched to camera 22, which covered part of the same area. Normal footage. Camera 24, which caught the edge of that parking lot from a different angle. Also normal. Only camera 23 had malfunctioned, and only for the exact duration when that figure had been visible. My hands were shaking slightly as I cycled through the other feeds, looking for any sign of the tall figure. Nothing. It was as if those 60 seconds had been surgically removed from reality. I grabbed my radio, then hesitated. What exactly was I supposed to report? That I'd seen someone tall walking through a parking lot? That their eyes had reflected light in a way that seemed unnatural? That they'd somehow vanished from a digital recording? Instead, I made a note in the security log. 11:52 p.m. Possible equipment malfunction on camera 23. We'll need technical inspection. But I knew it wasn't a malfunction, and deep down I suspected I'd just seen something I wasn't supposed to see. The food court incident was winding down by 12:15 a.m. Most of the teenagers had been released to their parents with citations, and only 2 were being transported to the station for more serious charges. The crowd of onlookers had dispersed, and the marketplace was returning to its normal New Year's Eve rhythm of music and celebration. Lieutenant Rodriguez came by the security office to check in. "Everything quiet on the cameras, Rivera." I almost told him about camera 23. Almost. But something in his expression, a tightness around the eyes, a forced casualness in his voice, made me hesitate. "Yeah, all quiet," I said instead. "Just the usual crowd control stuff." He nodded but didn't leave immediately. "Listen, we might be here for a while longer. Some follow-up we need to do. Keep monitoring those feeds, okay? Any unusual activity, you radio it in immediately. Unusual how? Just unusual." He turned to go, then paused. "And Rivera? Don't leave the office until we give the all clear. I mean it." After he left, I sat staring at the monitors with growing unease. In 3 years of working security, I'd never been told to stay in the office during an incident. Usually they wanted us out patrolling, being visible, helping to maintain order. This felt different. This felt like they were trying to keep me contained. At 12:45 a.m, curiosity got the better of me. Julie was still doing rounds somewhere on the south side of the complex. The radio had been quiet for 20 minutes. Most of the police seemed to have cleared out, leaving just a few units in the food court area. I made a decision that would change everything. I left the office. The night air hit me like a warm, humid wall as I stepped outside. Even in January, Miami nights carried that tropical weight that made your clothes stick to your skin within minutes. The sounds of celebration echoed off the water. Distant music, laughter, the occasional firecracker that someone had saved from earlier. I walked toward the north parking lot, telling myself I was just doing a routine patrol, that I wasn't specifically looking for any tall figures with reflective eyes, that I was just checking on the area where camera 23 had experienced its malfunction. The parking lot looked normal. Police cars had left tyre marks on the asphalt, and there were a few pieces of trash that would need to be cleaned up in the morning, but nothing out of the ordinary. I was about to head back inside when I heard it, a sound like static electricity but deeper, like the air itself was being torn. I turned toward the sound and felt every hair on my arm stand up. The sensation was immediate and overwhelming, like standing too close to a Tesla coil or walking beneath power lines during a storm. The air tasted metallic, sharp on my tongue, and then I saw it again. The figure was standing about 50 feet away, just beyond the edge of the parking lot lighting. It was definitely tall, taller than I'd estimated from the camera feed. 7 feet, maybe more. The proportions that had seemed off on the monitor were even more disturbing in person. The limbs were too long, the torso too narrow, and the head. The head was wrong in ways that my brain struggled to process. It stood perfectly still, watching me with those reflective eyes. There was an intelligence there that was unmistakably aware, unmistakably focused. It knew I was looking at it, and it was looking back. For a moment that felt like an eternity. We simply observed each other across that distance of concrete and shadow. I should have been terrified. I should have run, or screamed, or grabbed my radio. But instead I felt a strange sense of recognition, as if some part of me had been expecting this encounter. The figure tilted its head, too far to one side at an angle that would have snapped a human neck, and I heard that static sound again, stronger this time. The streetlights around me flickered. Then, without any visible movement, without taking a step or turning around, the figure simply wasn't there anymore. The absence was so complete that for a moment I wondered if I'd imagined the whole thing. But the hair on my arms was still standing up, and the taste of copper lingered in my mouth. I stood in that parking lot for another 10 minutes, waiting for it to return, but the night had gone back to normal. The air temperature returned to its typical subtropical warmth. The streetlights stopped flickering, and the only sounds were the distant echoes of New Year's Eve festivities. When I finally walked back to the security office, my legs were unsteady and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I was barely back in my chair when the radio exploded with activity. All units, we have a code 7 in the north parking area. SWAT is en route. I repeat, SWAT is en route to Bayside Marketplace. Code 7. In 3 years of security work, I'd never heard that designation used. I grabbed the radio handbook from the desk drawer and flipped through the pages of police codes. Code 1 through Code 6 were all there. Everything from routine traffic stops to armed suspects. But there was no Code 7 listed. Through the security office windows, I could see flashing lights converging on the marketplace from multiple directions. More police cars than I'd ever seen for a single incident, plus several unmarked black vehicles that definitely weren't standard Miami-Dade units. Rivera. Lieutenant Rodriguez's voice came through my radio, sharp and urgent. "I need you out of that office." Now. "Sir? I thought you wanted me monitoring the cameras." "Plans have changed. Exit the building immediately and report to the main parking area. Do not return to the security office under any circumstances." I looked at the monitors one more time, scanning for any sign of the tall figure. All cameras showed normal activity. Police cars, officers moving with purpose, nothing unusual. Camera 23 was working perfectly again. As I stood up to leave, I noticed something I'd missed before. The timestamp on camera 23's feed was wrong. While all the other monitors showed the correct time, 1:23 a.m., camera 23's timestamp was stuck at 11:51 p.m. 11:51, 1 minute before I'd first seen the figure. I grabbed a pen and quickly wrote down the discrepancy on a piece of paper, shoving it into my pocket as I headed for the door. Outside, the scene was unlike anything I'd experienced in my years working security. The entire north end of the marketplace had been cordoned off with police tape, and officers in full tactical gear were sweeping through the area with equipment I didn't recognise. Some of it looked like standard metal detectors, but other devices appeared more sophisticated. Handheld screens that glowed with complex readouts, instruments that emitted soft beeping sounds as they moved. More concerning were the men in plain clothes. They weren't Miami-Dade police, that much was obvious. They wore identical dark suits despite the humid night, and they moved with the kind of coordinated efficiency that spoke of federal training. One of them was directing the SWAT team's sweep patterns, while speaking quietly into a radio that looked far more advanced than anything in our security arsenal. I found Lieutenant Rodriguez near the entrance to the marketplace, but when I approached him, his expression was grim. "Rivera, I need you to go home. Your shift is over." "Sir, we're scheduled until 6 a.m. Not tonight. Consider this paid leave. Don't come back until you hear from us." Before I could ask any more questions, he was walking away, leaving me standing alone while tactical teams swarmed the area where I'd seen the figure just an hour earlier. As I walked to my car, I passed close enough to one of the SWAT officers to overhear part of his radio conversation. Target is no longer in the immediate area. Expanding search perimeter to include marina and surrounding blocks. Be advised, we're dealing with a mobile situation. Containment protocols are in effect until further notice. Target not suspect, not individual. Target. I drove home with more questions than answers, but I had the sinking feeling that asking those questions was going to get me into more trouble than I was prepared for. The next morning I called the security office to check in, and was told that all camera footage from New Year's Eve had been accidentally corrupted during a system update. 3 years of reliable digital storage, and the one night when I needed to review the feeds, everything had been wiped clean. I should have kept my mouth shut. Looking back, that's the decision that would have saved my job, my friendships, and quite possibly my life. But I'd seen something that defied explanation, and the official response was a cover-up so obvious it was almost insulting. The first person I told was Julie. We met for coffee 3 days after the incident, at a little Cuban place on Calle Ocho that we'd been to dozens of times before. Julie had been working security even longer than me, and if anyone would understand the strangeness of what had happened, it would be her. "The whole thing was weird, Marcus," she agreed, stirring sugar into her cortadito. "I've never seen that much police response for a food court fight, and the way they cleared us out afterward, it felt like they were trying to hide something." I leaned forward across the small table. "Julie, I think I saw what they were trying to hide." I told her everything. The figure on camera 23, the way it had vanished from the digital feed, the encounter in the parking lot, the reflective eyes and impossible proportions. I described the static electricity feeling, the way the streetlights had flickered, the sudden absence that had felt like a hole torn in reality itself. Julie listened without interrupting, her expression growing more sceptical with each detail. "Marcus," she said when I finished, "you know how that sounds, right?" "I know exactly how it sounds. But I also know what I saw. You were working a 12-hour shift on New Year's Eve. You'd been staring at security monitors for hours. Sometimes our eyes play tricks on us, especially when we're tired and stressed. It was the response I'd expected, but it still stung. The camera malfunction wasn't in my head, Julie. The timestamp error wasn't fatigue. Something happened that night, and they're covering it up." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Even if something strange did happen, what are you planning to do about it? File a report? Call the newspapers? They'd laugh you out of the building." But I was already past that point. The need to understand what I'd witnessed had become an obsession that was keeping me awake at night. I'd spent the past 3 days researching everything I could find about unexplained sightings in Miami, government cover-ups, and cases where security footage had mysteriously disappeared. That night, I created an anonymous account on Reddit and posted a carefully worded description of the incident on several conspiracy theory forums. Security guard at major Miami tourist location witnessed unexplained figure during police response to disturbance. Figure showed non-human characteristics and disappeared from digital surveillance during apparent equipment malfunction. Heavy federal presence followed. All footage from incidents subsequently destroyed. Looking for information about similar encounters. The responses were immediate and varied. Most were the usual internet skeptics calling me crazy or asking for proof I couldn't provide. But a few responses stood out. User blackout Miami. Similar incident reported at government center in December. Tall figure seen on security cameras. Footage disappeared. Witnesses transferred or fired. User eyes on the skies. Check out Project Blue Book files from the 1960s. Miami has a history of unexplained encounters that get buried. User whistleblower warn. Delete this post immediately. They monitor these forums. You're already on their radar. I didn't delete the post. Instead, I started documenting everything I could remember about the incident, writing detailed accounts of the encounter and saving them in multiple locations. I scanned the handwritten note about the timestamp error and uploaded it to several cloud storage accounts. Within 48 hours, every single one of my posts had been removed by forum moderators, citing unverified claims and potential misinformation. That's when I realised I was dealing with something much bigger than a simple cover-up. On Monday morning, I reported to work as usual, expecting to return to normal security duties. Instead, I was called into the Human Resources office before my shift even started. Margaret Chen, the HR manager, was sitting behind her desk with a file folder and an expression that told me this wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. "Marcus, we need to discuss a serious violation of company policy that occurred during your shift on New Year's Eve." My stomach dropped. "What kind of violation?" "According to Lieutenant Rodriguez's report, you abandoned your assigned post despite direct orders to remain in the security office. You also failed to report unusual activity that may have been relevant to an ongoing police investigation." I stared at her in disbelief. "I was told to leave the office. Rodriguez himself ordered me to—" "That's not what his report says. According to the official record, you left your post without authorization and failed to cooperate with law enforcement during a critical incident." She slid a piece of paper across the desk. "This is your termination notice, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building, and you're prohibited from returning to Bayside Marketplace property." I tried to argue, to explain what had really happened, but Margaret was already standing up, signalling that the conversation was over. "I'd strongly advise you to avoid discussing the details of your employment here with anyone," she said, as 2 security guards appeared in the doorway. "Your final paycheck will be mailed to your address on file." As I was escorted out of the building where I'd worked for 3 years, I caught a glimpse of my replacement already sitting in the security office, monitoring the same 37 cameras that had shown me something I wasn't supposed to see. That afternoon, I called Julie to tell her what had happened. Her phone went straight to voicemail. When I tried her again the next day, I got a message saying the number was no longer in service. I never spoke to Julie Santos again. Losing my job should have been a wake-up call. A rational person would have taken the hint, moved on, and found new employment without asking too many questions about why their previous position had ended so abruptly. I was not a rational person. Instead of backing down, I doubled down on my investigation. If they were willing to fire me to keep me quiet, then whatever I'd witnessed was even more significant than I'd initially believed. I started by mapping out every business in the Bayside Marketplace complex, identifying potential witnesses who might have seen something unusual on New Year's Eve. Most of the shops and restaurants would have been closed by the time of the incident, but there were a few 24-hour establishments that would have had staff present. My first stop was Marina Cafe, a small coffee shop that stayed open late to serve the restaurant workers getting off their shifts. The night manager, a woman named Rosa Gutierrez, remembered the police activity but initially claimed she hadn't seen anything unusual. Just a lot of cops, she said, wiping down tables with nervous energy, more than I'd ever seen for a teenage fight. Made me wonder if something bigger was going on. I pressed gently, explaining that I'd been working security that night and was trying to understand the full scope of what had happened. After some hesitation, Rosa looked around to make sure we were alone in the cafe. There was something else, she said quietly. Around midnight, just before all the police arrived, I heard this sound. Like a growl, but deeper. It made the windows vibrate. A growl? Not from a person, not from any animal I've ever heard. It came from outside, somewhere near the marina. Lasted maybe 10 seconds, then stopped. I looked out the window but didn't see anything. Scared the hell out of me, though. She paused, then added, "And the weird thing is, all the seagulls disappeared. You know how they usually hang around the docks all night looking for scraps? After that sound, I didn't see a single bird for the rest of my shift, like they all just left." My second significant lead came from Miguel Santos, who worked the night shift at the marina's boat rental office. Miguel was more reluctant to talk, but when I mentioned that I'd been fired for asking questions about that night, his attitude changed. "They got to you too, huh?" he said, glancing around nervously. "Same thing happened to my cousin. He was working valet parking that night, saw something he wasn't supposed to see. Next day, fired for performance issues. 20-year employee with a spotless record. What did he see? Something by the loading docks. Said it looked like a person at first, but when he got closer, he realised it was all wrong. Too tall, moving in a way that made his skin crawl. When he tried to report it, his supervisor told him to forget about it and sent him home early." Miguel pulled out his phone and showed me a grainy photo. He managed to snap this before his phone mysteriously reset itself. The image was blurry and poorly lit, but I could make out a tall, dark shape near one of the loading dock areas. The proportions looked wrong, elongated and angular in a way that suggested it wasn't human. "Can you send me this photo?" "Already tried. Every time I attempt to forward it or upload it anywhere, the file gets corrupted. My cousin's the only one who has the original, and his phone won't connect to any networks anymore. Just displays an error message whenever he tries to access cellular or Wi-Fi." The pattern was becoming clear. Multiple witnesses, all experiencing technological problems when they tried to document or share what they'd seen, all facing professional consequences for asking questions. But the most significant breakthrough came from an unexpected source. I was having lunch at a small Dominican restaurant in Little Havana when I overheard two men at the next table discussing something in hushed tones. One of them mentioned Bayside Marketplace and New Year's Eve, which immediately caught my attention. "Never seen anything like it in 20 years on the force," one was saying. "When those federal boys showed up, they took control of everything, told us to forget what we'd seen, and threatened our pensions if we talked." I turned slightly to get a better look at the speakers. Both appeared to be in their 50s, with the bearing of former law enforcement. The one doing most of the talking was a large man with greying hair and tired eyes. After they finished eating, I followed them out to the parking lot and approached carefully. "Excuse me," I said. "I couldn't help overhearing you mention Bayside Marketplace. Were you there on New Year's Eve?" The man who'd been talking immediately tensed up. "Who's asking?" Someone who was there too. Someone who got fired for asking the wrong questions. Something in my tone must have convinced him that I wasn't a threat, because his posture relaxed slightly. "You're the security guard. Rivera, right?" I nodded, surprised that he knew my name. "I'm Detective Frank Morrison." Was Detective Morrison anyway. Retired early after that night. He gestured to his companion. "This is Detective Louis Vargas, also retired. What did you see out there?" Morrison looked around the parking lot, checking for any observers, then made a decision. "Not here. Too exposed. You want answers? Meet us at the Whale Harbour tonight at 8. Come alone." The Whale Harbour was a dive bar in Key Biscayne, the kind of place where off-duty cops went to drink and complain about their jobs. When I arrived at 8, Morrison and Vargas were already there, sitting in a corner booth with a clear view of the entrance. "Before we start," Morrison said as I sat down, "you need to understand that everything we're about to tell you is off the record. We've got families, pensions, and a lot to lose. But what happened that night, it's been eating at us for months." He took a long drink from his beer, then began to speak. "We were called in as backup for the food court incident. Standard crowd control stuff, nothing unusual. But about 20 minutes in, we got new orders. Federal agents had arrived and were taking over the scene. They wanted us to establish a perimeter around the entire north end of the complex." Federal agents from which agency? That's the thing. They never identified themselves. No badges, no credentials shown to us. Just orders passed down from the lieutenant that we were to cooperate fully and ask no questions. Vargas leaned forward. "About an hour in, they brought in some kind of specialised equipment. Not standard law enforcement gear. These devices were scanning for something, and when they found it, the whole operation changed." "Changed how?" "They called for a containment unit," Morrison said. "Black trucks, unmarked vehicles, personnel in hazmat-style suits. They cordoned off a section of the parking lot and brought in what looked like a mobile laboratory." "Did you see what they were containing?" Morrison and Vargas exchanged glances. "We saw them load something into one of the trucks," Vargas said slowly. "Something large, covered in a metallic tarp. But before they sealed the container, the tarp shifted." He paused, seeming to gather courage to continue. "I got a glimpse of what was underneath. It was... I don't know what it was. Not human. Not any kind of animal I've ever seen. It was tall, probably 7 feet or more, with limbs that bent in ways that didn't make sense. And the skin. The skin looked wrong," Morrison finished. "Like it was reflecting light from underneath. Almost metallic, but organic at the same time. Was it alive? I don't know. It wasn't moving. But there was something about it that felt... aware. Like even unconscious or sedated, it was still somehow present." They told me that after the containment unit left, all officers involved were called into individual meetings with federal agents. Each was told that the incident was classified under national security provisions, and that discussing any details with unauthorised personnel would result in prosecution under the Espionage Act. "Most of the guys were fine with that," Morrison said. "They got overtime pay, a commendation for their service, and orders to forget the whole thing. But Vargas and I, we'd seen too much. We started asking questions. What kind of questions? Whether this was an isolated incident, whether there had been similar events in other cities, whether the public had a right to know that something non-human was being covered up by our own government. Within a week, both detectives had been called into internal affairs investigations. Morrison was accused of excessive force during an unrelated arrest from 6 months earlier. Vargas was investigated for financial irregularities in his expense reports. Nothing they could make stick, Vargas said, but the message was clear. Keep quiet or face consequences. Both men had chosen early retirement rather than continue to work under the threat of constant scrutiny. "The thing is," Morrison said as we prepared to leave, "this isn't the first time something like this has happened in Miami. We started digging into old cases, looking for patterns. There have been at least 3 similar incidents in the past 5 years. Always the same response. Immediate federal takeover, memory hold within 48 hours, witnesses either discredited or disappeared." He handed me a piece of paper with several addresses written on it. "These are the locations of the other incidents. If you're serious about investigating this, that's where you should start. But Rivera..." I looked up from the paper. "Be careful." Whatever you saw that night, whoever's covering it up, they've got resources we can't even imagine. They've already destroyed your career. Don't let them destroy your life. The first address Morrison had given me was a construction site in downtown Miami, where, according to police records, there had been a gas leak evacuation in March 2019. The official story was that workers had detected dangerous levels of methane and called in hazmat teams as a precaution. But when I spoke to Carlos Mendez, a construction foreman who'd been working the site that day, I got a very different account. "Gas leak my ass," Carlos said when I met him at a job site in Coral Gables. "I was the safety supervisor on that project. I know gas leaks, and what we saw that morning wasn't any kind of leak. According to Carlos, workers had discovered something while excavating for a new foundation. Something that had been buried about 12 feet underground, wrapped in what appeared to be a metallic cocoon or shell. It was the size of a person, maybe bigger. The outer layer was like nothing I'd ever seen, part organic, part technological. When we tried to cut through it to see what was inside, the whole thing started humming." Humming? Like electrical equipment, but alive somehow, and the temperature around it dropped about 20 degrees in a matter of minutes. Our breath was visible, right there in the middle of a Miami summer. Within hours, federal agents had arrived and declared the site a potential environmental hazard. All workers were evacuated, sworn to secrecy, and paid substantial bonuses for their discretion. "They brought in equipment I'd never seen before," Carlos continued, "extracted whatever was buried there and covered the whole thing up. Next day, official reports said it was a false alarm about gas levels." The second address led me to Virginia Key, where in August 2020, several witnesses had reported seeing strange lights over the water during what authorities described as military training exercises. Maria Rodriguez, who lived in a waterfront apartment that overlooked the bay, had been one of those witnesses. "It wasn't aircraft," she told me as we sat on her balcony, looking out over the same stretch of water. The lights moved in ways that defied physics. They would hover motionless, then accelerate to impossible speeds, then stop instantly. No sound, no visible means of propulsion. She'd tried to record the lights with her phone, but every video came out distorted or completely black. The strange part was what happened afterward. For 3 days, no marine life was visible in the bay. No fish, no dolphins, no birds. It was like every living thing had fled the area. When Maria had tried to report her sighting to local news stations, she was told that the military had already provided an explanation and that the matter was closed. The third address was the most disturbing. It led me to a residential neighbourhood in Homestead where, in November 2021, a family had reported a break-in with unusual circumstances. According to the police report I obtained through a records request, the Rodriguez family had called 911 claiming that intruders with non-human characteristics had entered their home during the night. I found Elena Rodriguez working at a local grocery store. She was a middle-aged woman with tired eyes who became visibly uncomfortable when I mentioned the incident. "I don't talk about that anymore," she said immediately. "My family. We've moved on." But when I pressed gently, explaining that I'd experienced something similar and was looking for answers, she agreed to meet me after her shift. "They came through the walls," she told me as we sat in her car in the grocery store parking lot. "Not through the doors or windows, through the walls themselves, like they could pass through solid matter." Eleanor described 3 figures, all tall and unnaturally thin, with elongated limbs and faces that seemed somehow incomplete. They had moved through her house silently, examining her family members as they slept, before departing the same way they had arrived. My youngest son, Diego, he woke up during it. He saw one of them standing over his bed. It looked down at him, and Diego said its eyes were like mirrors, reflecting everything but showing nothing. When Elena had called the police, they'd initially responded as if it were a standard home invasion. But when the responding officers heard her description of the intruders, everything changed. Within an hour, federal agents had arrived and conducted extensive interviews with the entire family. "They told us it was a shared hallucination caused by a gas leak," Elena said bitterly. But there was no gas leak, and hallucinations don't leave physical evidence. She showed me a photo on her phone. 3 perfectly circular indentations in her hardwood floor, each about 6 inches in diameter and a 1/4 inch deep. These appeared where they stood. The agents tried to convince us they'd always been there, but I'd lived in that house for 15 years. I knew every mark on those floors. After the investigation, Eleanor's family had been relocated to a different neighbourhood and given new jobs. Her husband, who'd been most vocal about the incident, had died in a car accident 6 months later, single vehicle collision, ruled accidental. That's when I stopped talking, Lena finished. Whatever they are, whatever they want, someone very powerful is protecting them, and people who ask too many questions, things happen to them. I was beginning to understand the scope of what I was dealing with. This wasn't just a cover-up of a single incident. It was a systematic suppression of information about ongoing contact with non-human entities. But I was about to learn just how closely I was being monitored. I'd just returned to my apartment after meeting with Elena when I noticed the man standing across the street. He was wearing a plain grey suit despite the Miami heat, and he was looking directly at my building. When I looked out the window again 10 minutes later, he was still there. The next morning, as I left for another interview with a potential witness, the same man was waiting by my car. "Mr. Rivera," he said as I approached. His voice was calm, professional, and completely devoid of emotion. "I think we need to have a conversation." He wasn't particularly tall or imposing, but something about his presence made my skin crawl. His eyes were the palest blue I'd ever seen, almost colourless, and when he looked at me, I felt like he was cataloguing every detail of my appearance. "Who are you?" "Someone who's been watching your recent activities with great interest. Your investigation into events at Bayside Marketplace, your conversations with former police officers, your meetings with the Rodriguez family. The fact that he knew about Elena immediately told me how thoroughly I was being monitored." "I'm just looking for answers," I said. "No, Mr. Rivera. You're looking for trouble, and you're very close to finding more than you can handle." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope, handing it to me. "These are photographs taken outside your apartment building over the past week. Notice anything interesting?" I opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside were a dozen surveillance photos showing me entering and leaving my building, walking to my car, meeting with various people. But it wasn't the photos themselves that made my blood run cold. It was the timestamp on each image. They had been taken from angles that should have been impossible, high above street level, as if the photographer had been floating in mid-air. And in several of the photos I could see partial reflections in windows and car mirrors that showed the photographer's position. The camera had been at least 30 feet off the ground. "We know everything you've been doing, everyone you've spoken to, every document you've accessed. You think you're investigating us, but we've been studying you since the moment you left that security office." He paused, letting that sink in. "You saw something you weren't supposed to see. That was an accident, an unfortunate coincidence. But instead of accepting the logical explanation and moving on with your life, you've chosen to pursue answers that could endanger national security." "National security? What kind of national security requires covering up contact with non-human entities?" The man's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind those pale eyes. The kind that prevents mass panic, economic collapse, and the breakdown of social order. "Do you really think the public is ready to learn that they're not alone in the universe? That beings with technology beyond our understanding have been operating on Earth for decades? So you admit it. These things, whatever they are, they're real. I admit nothing. But I'm offering you a choice, Mr. Rivera. Walk away now, and you can return to your normal life. We can arrange new employment, perhaps relocate you to a different city if you prefer. All we ask is your silence. And if I refuse, then you'll discover that there are worse things than being fired from a security job." He turned to go, then paused. "You have 48 hours to decide. After that, the offer expires and other measures will be considered necessary." That night I found my car window smashed and my apartment door slightly ajar. Nothing was missing, but every electronic device I owned had been mysteriously reset to factory settings. My computer's hard drive had been wiped, my phone had been remotely erased, and even my digital camera's memory card was blank. The message was clear. They could reach me anywhere, any time. and they had technology that made conventional security meaningless. But instead of intimidating me into silence, the threat only reinforced my determination to find the truth. I spent the next day acquiring new equipment and creating backup plans that I hoped would be hardest to detect. Burner phones paid for with cash, anonymous email accounts accessed from public computers, physical documents stored in multiple locations. If they wanted to play surveillance games, I was going to make them work for it. My breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Detective Morrison. He called me on one of my new phones with information that changed everything. Rivera, I've been doing some digging since our conversation. Found someone you need to meet. Former federal agent who worked these kinds of cases before he had a crisis of conscience. The meeting was arranged for a small cafe in Coral Gables. I arrived early and chose a table with clear sightlines to all entrances, paranoid now about being followed or monitored. The man who approached my table looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. He was thin, pale, with the kind of nervous energy that came from constantly looking over his shoulder. "You're Rivera," he said without preamble as he sat down. "I'm Agent Thompson. Former Agent Thompson, I should say. Morrison said you worked these cases." For 12 years I was part of a classified program that dealt with what we called anomalous contact events. What you witnessed at Bayside was just the latest in a long series of incidents that have been occurring with increasing frequency. Thompson looked around the cafe nervously before continuing. "The entities you saw, we call them visitors, have been making contact for decades. Not invasion-style contact, more like observation. Study. They seem to be monitoring human development, occasionally taking samples or specimens. Specimens? Missing persons cases that never get solved. People who vanish without a trace, often from areas where visitor activity has been detected. The official position is that there's no connection, but the patterns are unmistakable." He pulled out a thick folder and slid it across the table. "These are copies of classified reports from similar incidents across the country. Miami has had more visitor activity than almost anywhere else, probably because of its location and population density." I opened the folder and found myself looking at government documents marked with classification levels I'd never seen before. Incident reports, witness statements, technical analyses of recovered materials. Why are you showing me this? Because the program is changing direction. For years the policy was containment and secrecy. Document the encounters, clean up the evidence, silence the witnesses. But recently there's been a shift toward active cooperation. Cooperation? Trade agreements, technology exchanges. The visitors have been offering advanced science in return for access to human subjects and freedom to operate without interference. Thompson's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Some people in the government think this is humanity's chance to make a quantum leap in technological development. Others think we're selling our species to entities whose motives we don't understand." He pointed to a specific document in the folder. "That's a report from 3 months ago. A visitor delegation meeting with Pentagon officials to discuss expanded operations. Your incident at Bayside was part of a new protocol. Instead of completely hiding their activities, they're testing public response to limited exposure." "You mean they wanted me to see them?" "Not you specifically, but someone. They need to gauge how humans react to direct contact, how effectively the cover-up mechanisms work, how much pressure it takes to silence witnesses." The implications were staggering. I hadn't stumbled onto a secret. I'd been used as a test subject in some kind of psychological experiment. What happened to the entity they captured at Bayside? Transported to a secure facility in Nevada. But Rivera, here's the thing. It wasn't captured. It was surrendered. The visitors sometimes allow us to take individuals for study as part of the cooperation agreement. Thompson stood up to leave but turned back one more time. "There's a transportation scheduled for tonight. They're moving the Bayside specimen to a different facility, and there's going to be a window of vulnerability during the transfer. If someone wanted to document proof of the program." He left an address written on a napkin and walked away without another word. The address Thompson had given me was for a warehouse in the industrial district near the port. According to my research, it was officially owned by a shipping company, but tax records showed it had been leased to a federal agency under a classified contract. I arrived at 11 p.m. and found a position across the street where I could observe the warehouse without being seen. The building was surrounded by a high fence topped with razor wire, and I could see armed guards patrolling the perimeter. At 11:45, a convoy of black vehicles arrived, 3 SUVs and a large truck that looked like it had been modified for special cargo. Federal agents in tactical gear emerged from the vehicles and began preparing for some kind of operation. I'd managed to acquire a camera with a powerful telephoto lens, and I started documenting everything I could see. The agents were using equipment that looked far more advanced than standard law enforcement gear. Devices that glowed with soft light, instruments that seemed to scan the air itself. At midnight they brought out the container. It was roughly the size of a coffin, made from some kind of metallic material that seemed to shift and flow in the light. 2 agents carried it carefully to the modified truck, handling it with the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. But as they loaded the container, something went wrong. One of the agents stumbled, and the container tilted at an angle that caused part of its contents to become visible through a transparent section I hadn't noticed before. Through my camera lens, I got a clear view of what was inside. It was the entity from Bayside, but it was awake. Those reflective eyes were open and aware, looking directly through the transparent section toward the warehouse where I was hidden. Even from a distance of several hundred feet, I felt the same electric sensation I'd experienced in the parking lot. The same sense of being observed by an intelligence that was fundamentally alien. But what happened next changed everything I thought I understood about the situation. The entity moved its hand, or what passed for a hand, and placed it against the transparent barrier. Not struggling to escape, not trying to break free, but making what appeared to be a deliberate gesture. It was waving, not at the agents surrounding the container, but at me. Somehow it knew I was there, knew I was watching, and was acknowledging my presence. I kept shooting photographs, documenting every detail of the transfer process. But as the convoy prepared to leave, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. One of the agents had pulled out a device that looked like a tablet computer, but the screen was displaying what appeared to be a real-time satellite view of the industrial district. As I watched through my camera, a red dot appeared on the screen marking the exact building where I was hidden. They knew I was there. The agent with the tablet spoke into his radio, and I saw several other agents begin moving in my direction. I had maybe 2 minutes before they reached my position. I quickly ejected the memory card from my camera and slipped it into my shoe, then grabbed a backup card I'd brought and put it in the camera. If they caught me, I wanted them to find decoy footage that wouldn't reveal what I'd actually captured. But I didn't wait around to be caught. I slipped out of the warehouse through a back entrance and made my way through a maze of industrial buildings toward where I'd parked my car. Behind me, I could hear the sounds of pursuit, engines starting, radios crackling, the systematic search of a trained tactical team. I reached my car just as the first agent appeared at the end of the alley. Instead of driving toward the main road, which they would certainly be watching, I headed deeper into the industrial district, using my knowledge of Miami's back streets to evade the pursuit. It took me 3 hours of careful driving through residential neighborhoods and side streets before I was confident I'd lost them. When I finally made it home, I found my apartment had been searched again, but this time they'd left a message. Written on my bathroom mirror in what appeared to be some kind of luminescent ink was a single word: run. I didn't need to be told twice. Within an hour I had grabbed essential documents, the memory card with the photographs, and enough cash to disappear for a while. But before I left Miami, I had one more stop to make. I drove to Bayside Marketplace one last time, parking in the same lot where I'd first encountered the entity 3 months earlier. The place looked normal, tourists taking late-night photos, couples walking along the marina, the usual mix of activity that made Miami a 24-hour city. But I knew that beneath this normal facade something extraordinary was being hidden. I walked to the exact spot where I'd seen the tall figure that first night, looking for any signs of the encounter that had changed my life. The concrete looked the same, the lighting was unchanged, but I noticed something I'd missed before. There were small circular marks in the pavement, the same type of indentations Elena Rodriguez had shown me in her house. 3 perfect circles, each about 6 inches in diameter, arranged in a triangle pattern. They weren't damage from construction or wear patterns from foot traffic. They were too precise, too intentional. They looked like landing marks. As I knelt to examine them more closely, I heard a familiar sound, that electric static that seemed to come from the air itself. I stood up slowly and found myself face to face with the same entity I'd encountered months before. It was standing about 10 feet away, perfectly still, watching me with those reflective eyes. But this time, I wasn't afraid. After everything I'd learned, everything I'd discovered about the cover-up and the cooperation agreements, I realised that this wasn't a predator or an invader. It was a researcher, and I was part of its study. We regarded each other in silence for several long moments. Then, impossibly, it spoke. The voice didn't come through the air. It appeared directly in my mind, like a thought that wasn't my own. You have seen, you have documented, you have chosen to pursue truth despite consequences. Why? I asked. Not sure if I was speaking aloud or thinking the question. Your species stands at a threshold. Some among you are ready for broader contact. Others resist change. We study both responses. The government knows about you. They're working with you. Some among your leaders seek cooperation, others seek control. The outcome is not yet determined. What do you want from us? To understand, to evaluate, to determine if your species can join the broader community of intelligence. And if we can't? The entity tilted its head at that impossible angle, considering the question. Then you will remain isolated until you are ready, or until you are no longer capable of choice. The implications of that statement sent a chill through me, but before I could ask for clarification, the entity was speaking again. You have served your purpose, Marcus Rivera. Your reactions, your investigations, your resistance to suppression, all have provided valuable data. I was an experiment. You were a volunteer. You chose to see when others chose to look away. You chose to investigate when others chose to forget. You chose truth when others chose comfort. What happens now? Now you choose again. Accept silence and return to your previous existence, or continue seeking truth and accept the consequences. The entity reached into what appeared to be a pocket in its dark clothing and pulled out a small metallic device about the size of a smartphone. This contains evidence of our presence that cannot be erased or corrupted by your government's technology. Use it wisely. It placed the device on the ground between us, then stepped backward. We will be watching, Marcus Rivera. Your choices will influence how we proceed with your species. And then, just as it had before, the entity simply wasn't there anymore. I stood alone in the Bayside parking lot, holding an alien device that contained proof of everything I'd suspected. That was 6 months ago. I'm writing this from a small motel room in Colorado, the latest stop in a journey that has taken me across the country, as I stay ahead of the federal agents who are still hunting for me. The device the entity gave me has proven to be everything it promised, irrefutable evidence of non-human intelligence operating on Earth. I've uploaded copies of the files to dozens of secure servers, sent copies to journalists and researchers around the world, and created enough redundancy to ensure that the truth can't be completely suppressed. The response has been exactly what you'd expect. Most mainstream media outlets have ignored the evidence or dismissed it as elaborate hoaxes. Government officials have denied everything while simultaneously launching investigations into national security breaches. The usual debunkers have produced increasingly elaborate explanations for why, obviously alien technology must be some kind of military prototype. But some people are listening. Some people are investigating. Some people are asking the right questions. I've been contacted by witnesses from dozens of other incidents. Construction workers who found buried artifacts, military personnel who encountered craft that defied physics, scientists who were ordered to destroy research that proved too inconvenient. We're building a network of people who refuse to accept the official silence. People who believe that humanity deserves to know the truth about our place in the universe. The federal agents are still hunting for me. I change locations every few days, use only cash, avoid any kind of electronic communication that can be traced. But I'm not running scared anymore. I'm running strategic. Every day I stay free as another day to gather more evidence, to contact more witnesses, to build a case that even the most sophisticated cover-up can't suppress. because I understand now that this isn't just about what I saw at Bayside Marketplace. It's about the future of human civilization, about whether we'll be allowed to make informed choices about contact with non-human intelligence, or whether those choices will be made for us by a small group of government officials and corporate interests. The entities, the visitors, whatever we choose to call them, are real. They're here, they're studying us, and they're waiting to see what kind of species we really are. Some in our government have chosen cooperation and secrecy. They've decided that humanity isn't ready for the truth, that panic and social collapse would be inevitable if people knew we weren't alone. I believe they're wrong. I believe that people deserve to know that we have the right to participate in decisions about our own future. That truth, however disturbing, is better than comfortable lies. So I'm going to keep running, keep investigating, keep documenting. I'm going to find every witness, gather every piece of evidence, and build a case so comprehensive that even the most sophisticated disinformation campaign can't discredit it. They took my job, my friends, my normal life, but they can't take what I saw that night at Bayside. They can't erase the truth. And as long as I'm alive and free, I'm going to make sure that truth eventually reaches the people who deserve to know it. The hunt continues. My name is Marcus Rivera, and this is my testimony. If something happens to me, if I disappear or die under suspicious circumstances, remember that the truth doesn't die with the messenger. They're here, they're watching, and humanity's future hangs in the balance of choices we're not even being allowed to make. The question isn't whether we're alone in the universe. The question is whether we're brave enough to handle the answer.